Welcome to the Great Basin Weekly Fuels Briefing for Wednesday, June 24th. This is Gina Palma. Over the last 7 days, we've had very minimal precipitation across the region and mostly in the form of lighter showers and thunderstorms. You can see along the Sierra front, which there were some heavy showers with some flash flooding on the Sierra front several days ago, and then some thunderstorms across northern Nevada into Utah, parts of Idaho, and even the far south. But you can see most of those areas, this precipitation was below normal for the time of year. And if we look back 2 weeks, you can see not much change, really very dry conditions over much of central and eastern Nevada into Utah, with any precipitation we saw was below normal. Now looking at the number of days since we've seen wetting rains, and you can see many southern and central areas haven't seen wetting rains in over 30 or 40 days. However, many of the locations across the Great Basin have seen some recent light precipitation at times with thunderstorms, but again, we just haven't seen those rainfall amounts above 1/10 of an inch in much of central and southern areas. So looking at our drought conditions, our current long-term drought still have really severe to extreme drought in many areas of southern Idaho, eastern Nevada into Utah, with even exceptional drought along the southern Sawtooth into southwest Idaho and far northeast Nevada. The only areas really not in any significant drought are parts of western Nevada, which are just abnormally dry, and small portions of Idaho. And you can see here on the left, over the last month, these longer term drought conditions continue to worsen in southern Idaho, eastern Nevada, and into Utah. So looking at our current fire danger, you can see really most of the area in this orange color is above the 90th percentile for ERCs, where many areas over central and eastern Utah are above the 97th percentile. Even other areas that are not quite as dry are still above the 80th percentile for most of the region. There will be a fuels and fire behavior advisory issued this week for portions of eastern Nevada into Utah, especially for the juniper. We've seen very extreme fire behavior in some of our large fires, which we'll discuss on later slides. So looking at our current fire danger up north in Idaho and Wyoming, and you can see most areas are above the 80th to 90th percentile. However, looking at our ERC charts, although we have been above normal, or even in some areas in southwest Idaho at historical maximums for the time of year, we will have a strong cold front moving in later this week and through the weekend, which will significantly drop temperatures, increase humidity, and even bring some areas of wetting rains. So you can see the ERC trend is significantly downward over the next 7 days, although we will see it start to perk back up by the middle portion of next week. However, we will have lightning in the meantime, so that still could increase fire potential in some areas of Idaho before we see the cold front move in, along with stronger winds. Now looking at the fuels and fire activity across Idaho and Wyoming, as far as fuels, we are seeing sagebrush fuel moisture below normal and continuing to drop in the recent week. We also have quite a bit of fine fuel continuity and loading anywhere from Boise across the Snake River Plain into the Caribou-Targhee, and you can see the pictures here. Some reports in the Caribou-Targhee are showing fine fuel loading 35% higher than the 10-year average. Into the mountains, parts of the Salmon Chalice, we are still seeing 100 and 1,000-hour values continue to drop, but still remain at local thresholds to keep the zones in approaching critical. Down in Twin Falls and the southern Sawtooth, timber and sagebrush fuel moisture are at record lows for the time of year. Cheatgrass is fully cured, and perennial grasses are curing up to 5,500 feet. We are continuing to see smaller fires across Idaho into Wyoming, and the most recent larger fire is on the Bridger Teton, the Kinky Fire, grew to over 650 acres in timber litter and understory with reports of bug kill and also alignment with wind and slope. Moving on to Nevada, we are also seeing ERCs above the 80th or 90th percentile in most areas, with the exception of the Sierra Front that did see some of those heavier showers and thunderstorms, although that real heavy precipitation still was somewhat localized, so some areas really saw no precipitation. You can see from the trend of our ERCs, although we were above normal and above that 80th or 90th percentile, really the entire state will see ERCs dropping just due to the cold front moving in with those cooler temperatures and some spotty precipitation with showers and thunderstorms. However, this is just ERC. Some of our other fuel moistures really will stay low, and we'll talk about that later. So looking at our live and dead fuels and fire activity across Nevada, we have had mainly smaller fires in much of the state. However, we are seeing fires burning mostly in the cheatgrass and sagebrush, and even on the Carson district, these fuels are being fully consumed by the brush. However, over eastern Nevada and the southern portion of the Ely district, we've had a lot of initial attack from recent lightning busts, with the Grapevine and Cane Spring fires, our two large fires in the southern portion of that region, growing significantly to over 17,000 acres. And the Grapevine is quite a bit larger and has a team mobilized. So we are seeing some extreme fire behavior, especially in the juniper down in that portion of the state, and fires are burning in grass, timber litter, understory, and PJ with fuel moisture lower than they've ever seen and rapid spread rates with little wind. So very significant situations down there, and this is also the portion of the region that will be in the fuel and fire behavior advisory. So moving over to Utah and the Arizona Strip, we are seeing all areas above the 90th or 97th percentile region-wide. And however, looking at our ERC charts, although those ERCs, again, well above normal, not quite at historical maximums, but also we'll be seeing decreases in ERC going through the weekend into next week as we do see much cooler temperatures. However, prior to that, we still have lightning and very significant wind with this strong cold front across the Great Basin. So things definitely probably going to get worse before they start to improve a bit. And this is just with ERCs, so this is at least some good news with temperatures, but we still have other conditions to worry about. So looking at the 1,000-hour and juniper fuel moisture, this is really where conditions won't be changing much, even with the cooler temperatures and the drop in the ERCs. And you can see for portions of the Arizona Strip and even into Utah, and this is also representative of eastern Nevada, juniper fuel moisture at record lows for the time of year. And looking at the 1,000-hour fuel moisture, well below normal, but the important trend here, as you can see, even with the decreasing ERCs, 1,000-hour fuel moistures will still stay about where they currently are. So our fire situation is still significant over eastern Nevada into Utah, where we currently have a lot of our large fires. And you can see that here on our map for Utah. This is our current fire situation. We have currently several large fires across the region. We did have the Rock Canyon fire and the Dellenbaugh fire down on the Arizona Strip, and the Rock Canyon grew to over 4,500 acres. They are seeing record low fuel moisture down there, with juniper in the 60th percentile range and dead fuel moisture in the 1 to 4% range. So very dry conditions down south, and similar up north. Again, on the Wildland Fire Service Unit 11 and the Fish Lake, you can see we've had extreme fire behavior, especially with the cottonwood quickly growing to over 60,000 acres in just 2 days, and a very catastrophic situation down there around Beaver. Then we also have the Iron Fire up north and the Hastings Fire, both to which grew over 37,000 acres and 26,000 acres respectively. Significant cheatgrass is being reported at the higher elevations, which is extremely unusual. We really don't have anything to base that on as far as amounts because we typically don't see it. So just even hearing reports of that is really significant in the higher elevations. Although the lower elevations don't have as much cheatgrass with the very dry conditions we saw over the winter. Fires are burning in tall grass, timber litter, and understory, and almost every fire is growing to over 40 acres, and obviously quite a few large fires and team fires in Utah. So looking at our critical fuel status, it really hasn't changed all that much in the last week. We still remain critical across much of Nevada and Utah. The only changes has been over eastern Utah, where we are seeing more areas turn to that critical with the recent heat, wind, very dry conditions with single-digit humidity. Up north, not much changes across Idaho and Wyoming with fuel conditions. And again, we may see this change a bit more over the weekend, especially in the north, as we see that cold front move through, but this will just be a temporary moderation of the fuels, so we don't expect long-term effects from the weather that's moving in. That concludes our weekly fuels briefing. Check back next week for the latest updates.